How to Become a Superior Gender, a global conversation on gender equality, Part 2. Welcome to our channel. Today, we are presenting the second part of a three-piece video on ultimately being the superior gender. It elaborates the call for us to lend a voice to individually becoming the superior gender. By collectively asserting our rights to changing the concept of gender equality to a more practical concept that embraces not just an idea, but also the existing structures that include culture, religion, and other vices. Recap: in the previous video, we discussed the reason for gender equality, various global views, recognized the voices of our leaders on the matter, and we are now continuing from where we stopped, which is the perspectives of the Arab world. Join us as we dive in for a more enlightening session. Subscribe to our channel, like and share so we can create a global change. Perspectives in the Arab world. Continue. Cultural and religious interpretations also fuel debate. In many Arab societies, conservative views on gender roles are widespread. Some leaders and clerics publicly defend traditional norms as part of culture or faith, which critics say stalls progress. For example, scholars like Lina Abarafa have highlighted that the Arab region still has the world's widest gender gap, roughly 40% behind parity, and warn that ignoring this shortfall undermines development. Lebanese-American academic Abarafa bluntly notes that women's struggles in the Arab world often go unacknowledged amid such cultural barriers. Similarly, commentator Yara M. Asi and others emphasize that the Middle East can no longer afford to ignore the economic and social cost of sidelining half its population. Indeed, analysts calculate that if Arab countries raised women's workforce participation to men's levels, regional GDP could jump by about $2.7 trillion. This figure, almost half of the entire regional economy, powerfully illustrates what is at stake. Equality is not only a moral issue but an economic imperative. Advocates also stress peace and stability as a motivation. Studies show that peace processes, including women, tend to yield longer-lasting outcomes. Evidence from conflict zones indicates that more inclusive peace processes involving meaningful contributions by women are more likely to help achieve sustainable peace. In other words, leaving women at the table leads to better, more stable agreements. Given the Middle East's history of conflict, activists argue that excluding women weakens security, Islamic feminism, and faith-based equality. Another important perspective comes from Islamic feminism. Rather than seeing faith and feminism as incompatible, Islamic feminists argue that religion can be a source of justice. They work to reinterpret sacred texts, seeking the faith's original spirit of equality. As one scholar explains, Islamic feminisms are reform movements whose objective is ample social justice for women, recovering the original liberation's message of the Quran by means of a feminist hermeneutic to support equality and dignity of women and oppressed people. In practice, this has led to concrete wins. For example, activists in India recently used feminist readings of Islamic law to criminalize the unilateral divorce practice of triple talaq, ending a centuries-old injustice. By asserting that women's emancipation is also spiritual, Islamic feminists insist religion cannot be left outside the fight for gender justice. They remind us that Muslim-majority societies have a diversity of women and feminisms, and that change can come from within cultural and religious traditions as much as from secular policies, regional perspectives. Africa. In much of sub-Saharan Africa, there is growing political will to advance women's rights as part of development. Dozens of African governments have ratified treaties like the Maputo Protocol and adopted laws to secure women's land, labor, and political rights. Perhaps the most striking example is Rwanda. After the 1994 genocide, the new Rwandan constitution reserved seats for women in parliament. The result is that Rwanda has had the world's highest share of women legislators for years. Its 2024 elections produced a legislature that is 63.8% female, literally a two-thirds majority. This reflects a deliberate choice to place women at the forefront of rebuilding the nation. African women leaders are also active region-wide. They have successfully lobbied for gender quotas, anti-violence laws, and economic programs continent-wide. For example, United Nations Women notes that African women's networks have been instrumental in shaping national policies and agendas across the continent. In short, many African leaders see women's empowerment as central to peace and prosperity, and this has begun to translate into measurable policy advances. Asia. In Asia-Pacific, the picture is more mixed. Some countries have made remarkable strides in female education and health, yet leaders often struggle with entrenched barriers. A United Nations study finds that despite gains in schooling, gender gaps in employment and politics remain stubbornly large. For example, many South Asian countries still see less than 30% female labor force participation, and women do 3 to 5 times as much in paid care work as men. Culturally, Asian societies span a wide range. East Asian nations like Japan and South Korea have had female presidents and CEOs, but also still exhibit strong patriarchal norms. Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines show high voter support for women, whereas in parts of South Asia and the Middle East, strict patriarchal interpretations limit women's roles. Leaders from Bangladesh to Japan publicly endorse women's empowerment, but often face the reality that attitudes and infrastructure are still catching up. In short, Asian governments acknowledge gender equality as a goal, but many admit that progress is stagnating in areas like labor participation and protection from violence. It underscores that economic growth alone won't change minds. Dedicated policies are needed. Challenges and opportunities. Investing in equality. Achieving parity will not happen for free. The United Nations now estimates the world needs roughly $360 billion extra per year to fully close the gender gap by 2030. This figure comes from the United Nations Women's analysis of current shortfalls. It accounts for things like building schools, enforcing anti-discrimination laws, expanding health care, and funding women's entrepreneurship. The message is clear: reaching equality requires sustained, dedicated funding. On the flip side, that investment is widely seen as cost-effective. Closing gaps leads to economic growth and social stability. As one report bluntly notes, the world is significantly behind on its commitments to gender equality unless financing increases. Boosting women's representation. Underrepresentation of women in leadership is both a challenge and an opportunity. Globally, only about 27% of parliamentary seats are held by women. Studies consistently show that when more women serve in government or corporate boardrooms, decisions tend to be more inclusive of social needs. Experts advocate measures like gender quotas and mentorship programs. For instance, Rwanda's mandatory 30% quota coupled with open elections nearly doubled women's share of its lower house in one cycle. When women lead, issues like family welfare, education, and justice often receive greater attention. Expanding women's seats via affirmative action can jumpstart this process, but it must be combined with ensuring candidates have real power and competence, not just a seat. Across these perspectives, two themes recur: the challenges that remain and the opportunities that equality offers. Socially, leaders recognize that entrenched norms must shift. An often quoted saying captures it: "We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back." This was Malala Yousafzai's warning on girls' futures. Economically, the gains from gender equality are clear. Embracing women's talents could add trillions to economies. Politically, including women in decision-making is linked to better governance and peace. As one global advocate, Melinda Gates, has put it, when women and girls are equal, everyone benefits. And indeed, the examples above show that leaders around the world are finally echoing this logic. Their words, whether a president's pledge, a prime minister's law, or an activist's rallying cry, form part of a growing conversation. In the end, the message from this chorus of voices is inspiring. Gender equality is now acknowledged as a universal priority across continents and cultures. It is not just a women's issue, but an all-of-society issue. Each leader quoted above adds emphasis from Obama's vision of freedom for everybody to Seema Bahas's call for investment in our shared future. That journey toward equality continues, and it is up to all of us to keep it moving forward. As Malala reminds us through her words and example, the pen is mightier than the sword. With education, courage, and collective will, one child, one teacher, one pen, and one book truly can change the world. Changing cultural norms. Policies alone cannot end inequality if cultural biases remain. Experts emphasize that we must transform mindsets and traditions. As Michelle Obama explained at an international forum, discussions about girls' education and empowerment must tackle the bigger, bolder conversation about how society values women. In her words, the problem isn't only about resources. It's also about whether societies cling to outdated laws and traditions that oppress and exclude women. This suggests education campaigns, media representation, and community dialogues are crucial. Examples include engaging religious leaders to reinterpret texts as Islamic feminists do and promoting male allies who model equality. Countries that integrate gender sensitivity into school curricula and public services often see attitudes shift over generations. The opportunity is huge. Evolving norms can unlock women's talents and remove invisible barriers like school curriculums or chores that were once assigned only to boys. Ending online harassment. A modern obstacle to women's participation is digital abuse. World leaders now acknowledge that sexist trolling and threats on social media can silence women's voices. Research finds female politicians receive far more abusive comments online than men, often targeting their appearance or making sexual threats. Scholars warn this disproportionate targeting has chilling effects. It discourages women from running for office or speaking out, effectively pushing them out of politics. The solution requires policy action too, for example, stronger laws against cyber harassment, holding platforms accountable for hate speech, and support networks for women in public life. By protecting women from online abuse, countries can ensure equal participation in the digital public square. Civil society campaigns like #NotTheCost and #ReclaimTheInternet are already pressuring tech firms and lawmakers to act. Keeping up that momentum is key. This is the end of this session. Proceed to the next video for the conclusion. What can you do? Subscribe to our channel, like and share so we can create a global change. Comment, vote, speak, mentor, challenge systems that silence. Demand gender impact assessments in national budgets. Push for equal pay, safe workplaces, and parental leave. Support leaders who champion women's rights not just in word, but in action. Educate the next generation to see equality not as a favor, but as a foundation. One global voice said it best: a nation cannot flourish by stifling the dreams of its daughters. Another reminded us, when women and girls are equal, we all benefit. Let us build a future where that truth isn't just spoken but lived. Subscribe to our channel, like and share so we can create a global change. Let's break boundaries together.